This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
Pleased to welcome you to this IIEA seminar. My name is Mark Mellett. I'm a former Irish Defence Forces Chief of Staff. I'm an adjunct professor at UCC, and my areas of interest are security, climate and ocean governance. And while I also chair the Maritime Area Regulatory Authority here in Ireland, I'm here as a member of the IIEA and I'm in a personal capacity. Underwater telecommunications cables play a critical role in our daily lives. In recent years, the protection of these cables has intensified, partially due to growing concerns about sabotage. To discuss the threats which these vital pieces of infrastructure face and what we can do to protect them, we're delighted to be joined today by Camino Kavanagh, Senior Fellow with the UN Institute for Disarmament Research and a visited Senior Fellow with the Department of War Studies at King's College, London. Dr. Kavanagh will speak for up to 15 minutes or so, and then we will go to a Q&A with our audience. You'll be able to join the discussion with the Q&A function in Zoom, and please feel free to send your questions in throughout the session, and we'll come to them once Dr. Kavanagh has finished her presentation. Just a reminder to today's presentation and the Q&A session are both on the record. We'd also ask that you might use social media or LinkedIn, use X and Twitter with at IIEA as the handle. I'd like now to formally introduce Camino and hand over to her. Dr. Camino Kavanagh is a Senior Fellow with the UN Institute for Disarmament Research and a visiting Senior Fellow with the Department of War Studies in King's College, London. Her current research focuses on international security, conflict and technology, as well as emerging issues relevant to critical subsea infrastructure. Camino is also a Senior Digital Advisor to the UN Department of Political Affairs, Policy and Mediation Division. She served as an advisor rapporteur to the 2019-21 and 2016-2017 UN negotiation processes on cyber, ICT and international security. Over the past decade, she has also advised and consulted with the UN Secretary General's Office, the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, the European Commission, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the Organization of American States, as well as with government departments, agencies on issues relating to her area of expertise. I want now just to, before Camino starts her presentation, to say I thank her for her time, and she spent over a decade working in conflict and post-conflict contexts, including the UN, preparing and also in dealing with peacekeeping operations and political missions. Camino, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thanks also to the Institute for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to focus predominantly on, or pull predominantly from a report that we just had published this morning by UNIDIR, which looks at subsea telecommunications cables and what it means in policy and practice when governments actually designate them as critical infrastructure. But just to roll back a little bit, so today some 530 cable systems are currently active or under construction. Subsea fiber optic cables are now the backbone of our communications infrastructure. More than 95% of global internet voice and data traffic passes through the vast submerged network. So literally all of our private business, government and military communications depend on it, as do global financial transactions, all the way down to humanitarian assistance. The strategic value of the infrastructure continues to grow in tandem with our digital dependence and our high quality, low latency connectivity needs, which I think many people also often question the value of satellites. They're of significant value, but there's still no match in terms of latency and so forth. But despite all of the positive opportunities that subsea cable systems carry for our connectivity, as Mark had mentioned, the past decade or so has seen growing concern on the part of countries across the globe regarding their security and resilience. And this can be for very, very different reasons. Most cable faults are caused by commercial activity, such as fishing, anchoring, and dredging, or by natural phenomena, such as underwater earthquakes or landslides. I think Colin McCann's new book called Twist is a great ventures greatly into these issues. But there has been an uptick in activity involving states, most of it very difficult to actually ascertain or to confirm and attribute. But these potential issues pose risks to subsea cable systems, and this is particularly acute in certain maritime regions such as the North Atlantic, the North Sea, the Baltic, the South China Sea and the Red Sea. Evidently, these concerns vary significantly across countries, regions and sub-regions, but grosso modo, governments are concerned about an ever more complex digital ecosystem, protecting cables from state-backed espionage, surveillance activity at sea and on land, protecting cables from cable sabotage or other types of gray zone activity, the scope and scale of maritime surveillance needs. They're also concerned about IP theft, economic espionage, targeting critical technologies and related R&D, especially in the areas of photonics, semiconductors, robotics, and AI, all of which are fundamental to the cable systems, but also their protection and repair. States are also concerned about broader supply chain security and potential access to industry data or access to different parts of the supply chain. And they're concerned about access to data on cable faults and disruptions and a range of other issues. Evidently, as I mentioned, these concerns differ depending on where a government is or where a country is globally. These concerns come on top of those that industry is concerned about, and that tends to be much more, those concerns tend to be much more in the realm of regulatory complexity and overreach, project financing, dealing with the most common forms of cable damage, which, as I mentioned, tend to be damage caused by fishing, commercial shipping, and natural events. But based on the research that I've been doing for UNIDIR, along with two colleagues, Jonas Franken and Wenting Hay, on subsea cables as critical infrastructure, it's clear that a growing number of countries now qualify or designate subsea cable systems or parts of them as critical, if not strategic infrastructure, the security and resilience of which is vital to economic and societal well-being, as well as national security and much else. So we looked at what this translates into in practice, considering government efforts to strengthen resilience and security of the systems from the perspective of how they contribute to the system's absorptive, restorative, and adaptive capacities. So basically the capacities the system requires to anticipate, resist, absorb, respond to, and recover from negative impacts, carry out its original functions, and adapt in response to lessons learned from incidents or changing circumstances. So while the systems are generally designed and deployed by industry with these capacities in mind, in our report, we argue that effective government action on security and resilience can also contribute to strengthening these resilience capacities. And what we found that under consideration of criticality, several states are doing a range of things. For example, many are beginning to update, streamline, or regulate or realign their regulatory frameworks, attempting to ensure greater coordination also with other policy and regulatory areas. Many states are also seeking to understand changes in cable ownership structures and relevant regulatory and national security implications. Some states have launched public consultations or issued tenders to identify market failure and where government funding or investment may be needed for enhancing redundancy and repair. And new funding sources are being established in some places to cover such gaps. In some instances, critical infrastructure designation is helping release budgetary resources to cover the costs of the personnel and the procurement, testing, and deployment of new equipment and capabilities, particularly for maritime domain awareness and for informing defense and deterrence strategies, missions, and operations. In light of the uptick of incidents at sea affecting undersea infrastructure, a growing number of countries are integrating subsea cables into their national preparedness and crisis response plans and establishing coordination arrangements at different levels. So this includes new arrangements to enhance situational awareness of threats to and vulnerabilities of the systems, be it at sea, on land, or in cyberspace, and where supply chains are concerned. It also includes designating relevant points of contact at policy and operational levels and reviewing mechanisms for engagement with industry. This is a really key part of the whole framework. Some countries are also looking at identifying pathways for dealing with the persistent anchor damage caused by to cables by vessels underway. Subsea cable security and resilience is also becoming quite an important topic of cooperation between states. Let's call it a new era of cable diplomacy. Beyond diplomatic action triggered by some of the recent cable damage incidents and the attribution statements referenced, there are increasing exchanges within across regions on national policy, regulation, the international law applicable to subsea cable issues, national preparedness and crisis response. Again, engagement with industry actors has been key to such exchanges and remains key to such exchanges. I think bringing it back to Europe, many of these actions are being motivated by newer updated instruments such as the NIS2 directive, the Critical Entities Resilience Directive, the updated Maritime Security Strategy, and more recently, the EU recommendation on secure and resilient submarine cable infrastructures, and the even more recent action plan on cable security. Many countries in the European context are also motivated by new critical undersea infrastructure related security arrangements that have been stood up over the past couple of years under the auspices of NATO and the Joint Expeditionary Force. And just as many within Europe and globally are being motivated by the New York Statement on subsea cable security and resilience that was tabled at the UN General Assembly in October last year. And also by a new arrangement that has been established jointly by the International Telecommunications Union and the International Cable Protection Committee, very much focused on cable resilience also. So needless to say, these and other efforts vary significantly across states in terms of implementation and maturity. And I think the practical differences that occur as a result of a critical infrastructure designation varies very much from country to country. There's often limited conceptual clarity around subsea cable security and resilience, driven in part by how the topic is considered by different communities. For some, it's a telecommunications issue. For others, it's an economic security issue or a trade and competition one. Some view it as a maritime security problem, yet for others, it's a seabed warfare one. But in reality, I think there's no doubt that it's a whole of government question requiring whole of government response and coordination and very, very tight coordination and engagement with the private sector. Other challenges involve questions related to skills, capabilities, and resources. There's risk of government regulatory underreach or overreach. Also a risk, we've seen this, of government overreaction or underreaction in the event of cable-related incidents, which can lead to misunderstandings and miscalculations. And here I think it's useful to highlight, Mark, the discrepancy between the effects of recent cable damage incidents and, let's say, telecommunications cable incidents on actual service delivery, which has been minimal, and the actual governmental response, which, due to the strategic locations of where they have occurred, has meant a higher categorization of the incidents with the response involving significant capabilities. At the same time, this helps send a strong signal about the infrastructure and its criticality, and has triggered a greater focus on deterrence, both by denial and by punishment, especially vis-a-vis certain actors. I think these different issues and challenges provide significant opportunities for cooperation between states. And you could almost say that we're at a point regarding subsea cables where we were with cyber security related issues over 15 years ago, when we started talking about the governance elements, about norms, confidence building measures, the international law applicable to state behavior with regard to cyberspace, and the different track 1.5 and track 2 dialogues that many of us have been involved in. But I'll stop there and maybe we can have a conversation. I don't want to go on too long, Mark.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.